What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 4 of basically every black character in video games. You know the drill. First 3 parts are up, so I suggest you see those 3 parts first, then come back to this one for part 4. And this is pretty long, so there may be an extra part or 2 afterwards. But that being said, let's get back into it and move on to the next of the iconic RPG franchises that has basically had some very noticeable entries outside of Fire Emblem. And that's Final Fantasy. And granted, Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy aren't connected in any way. Granted, although I wish they did have like some form of crossover. But then again, that being said, Final Fantasy has been iconic ever since the start. And in fact, entries like Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI have been very much popular entries. That being said, we have not had a black character until the 7th entry. And yes, I know there are going to be a lot of you groaning, but honestly, it has to be said because I'm surprised there was never a black character in earlier entries. But even with that being said, surprisingly enough, in terms of Final Fantasy VII, we do get the character of Barret, who is basically your gruff, no-nonsense black man who's always cursing every few minutes. And while we didn't have voice acting in the main games until say Final Fantasy X, but even with that presence was felt. I mean, heck, even in the remake, he was dead. When the remake showed up, honestly, John Eric Bentley definitely made his mark on the series. Granted, Bo Billingsley also did well as it did gangbusters on Barret as well. And this is the same guy who voiced Ogremon from Digimon. Yeah. But that being said, honestly, even with that, Barret proved that, honestly, either way, every time, there's being a scary black man isn't always like that, because sometimes the scariest black man always has to have some form of soft side. And for Barret, it's his daughter Marlene, who he basically dotes on more than Mace Hughes does with his daughter. Oh boy. Yeah. Anyway, that being said, when it comes down to it, he wasn't the only one who showed up, as just one game later in Final Fantasy VIII, we were given the character of Kiro Seagill, who was basically a well-known soldier from the past of the game. And in fact, he was basically a part of a group with 3 characters, including Laguna Noir, one of the most chill and laid-back dudes the game has to offer. Trust me, I've never played Final Fantasy VIII, but again, I want to. I just have to play through Final Fantasy VII first. But the fact that he's basically seen as a sort of voice of reason really does say the least. But then we had to wait a full 4 games for the next black representation, and it's from Final Fantasy 12. Okay. Here's something, for those that don't already know, which I'm sure you don't. I do not like Final Fantasy XII. I found it kind of a little disorienting and a little too complicated to understand. That being said, I'm willing to pick it back up, but yeah, it's gonna be too soon. But even with that, yeah, we actually have a black representation in this one in the character of Fran. And yeah, here's the thing. Fran is a member of a race of rabbit-like beastmen known as, of course, the Viera. And granted, here's the reason why if you remember when I talked about Fire Emblem, a certain Wolf Queen was not mentioned. Yeah. That being, when it comes down to it, while a lot of people consider Nyla from Radiant Dawn to be black, and thus it would essentially extend to Volug, don't know how to pronounce his name. Honestly, there are not that much, proof that they can be considered as black, outside of them being from the Hatari Desert. And it's that same thought and logic that basically extend to others in the Fire Emblem universe, specifically the Tugwell from Fire Emblem Awakening, and thus Pan and Yarny. Which, honestly, I know there's a difference between the Tugwell and the Viera, but with that being said, there's really not that much. And that being said, and heck, even in terms of Final Fantasy, there is a difference between... I was actually surprised to notice that Kimahri and Alonso weren't considered as black, but Fran and the Viera were. Either way, I don't know what's going on there, but either way, it's Square Enix's decision, and honestly, at least I'm glad to get some feminine black representation. And then there's Final Fantasy XIII, aka the Hallway Simulator. And yes, this essentially gives us the character of Saj Katsroy, and of course his son Daj. And yeah, when it comes down to it, he's basically one of the few individuals Saj is one of your main party members, and basically one of the LC. Again, not played Final Fantasy XIII. I want to, even though I know what it's going to contain. But even with that, each of the LC basically has characters basically becoming, linked with each of the Eidolons. See Snow with Shiva, Hope with Alexander, and Saj with Rama. Which really does say a lot. Plus his and Daj's relationship with the Chocobo chick really does also make some sense. Kind of like the Chocobo chick's kind of an extra child to Saj. Really does say a lot. We haven't gotten that many black characters from Final Fantasy, maybe outside 14, but with that, our role-playing games have had a lot of black characters showing up as well. And honestly, it really does say a lot. From Trials of Mana giving us the character of Kevin, who of course is a former beast, is a beastman and a prince of a kingdom of beastmen, which, again, I know he hasn't been shown as black, but he's basically dark-skinned to the point that he's close to being black. And then there's Karn from Breath of Fire, or Breath of Fire 1, who... yeah. If you thought Makalov was that bad, Karn is worse. Yeah, Karn is basically just more or less based on blackface. Is just something else entirely. I don't know what they were going with, but yeah, really needs to change. But oh boy, we're not done with the controversies just yet. That one just so happens to come courtesy of Persona. And yeah, I know when a lot of people think of Persona, which is they think of like Persona 5 or actually, most people will think of just Persona 5. That's how well known it is. However, many people don't think about Persona 1. In all fairness, we were meant to have a playable party member who was black. That comes from the character of Mark, who in Japanese whose Japanese name is Masao. I mean, and granted, he's basically white. However, in the original Japanese dub, he was originally seen as black. I don't know what they were going at. I think and I don't know why they decided to whitewash a character. But considering how Persona 6 is on the horizon, hopefully, maybe we may very well end up getting that black character. Who knows? But even with that, let's also talk about another somewhat controversial RPG series, Mass Effect. Yeah, honestly, the fact I go from Breath of the Wild to Persona to Mass Effect is saying a lot. And honestly, Mass Effect is known for having so many characters of so many different races or colors or even species basically working together. And you have a lot of characters. However, you don't get a black crew member on the Normandy until Mass Effect 2. Where you get, I believe his name is Jason. Yeah. Honestly, he's basically your main black character on that. Unless a certain iconic Krogan, who's a solid dancer, is seen as black, then we wouldn't know. As for Mass Effect 3, we actually get Admiral David Anderson, who is played by the legendary Keith David as a party member, or as a crew member. Honestly, I know it's just 2 of these 3 games, but really does say a lot. What about Mass Effect Andromeda? I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. This will be continued in part 5.